There is a statistic buried in Daylily research that should make every gardener who has ever divided one in spring put down their spade and rethink everything. Studies on daylily division timing show that up to 80% of clumps divided in spring produce 0 blooms that same year. Not reduced blooms, not a thin season. 0. And the reason almost nobody ever figures this out is that the failure shows up 4 months after the mistake was made. You split the clump in April, it leafs out through May and June looking completely normal, and then July arrives with no flower scapes. Most gardeners blame a bad weather year. They blame the soil. They blame the cultivar. The actual cause was the calendar. The month your daylilies need to be divided is right now, August. And division timing is only the beginning of what this plant requires in the next several weeks, most of it running completely opposite to how you care for every other perennial in your garden. Daylilies are the most widely planted perennial in North America for good reason. They perform across zones 3 through 9 with documented adaptability pushing into zone 10 in certain microclimates. More than 100,000 registered cultivars exist, but that adaptability comes with a catch. The care that works for most perennials actively harms daylilies at specific points in the season. August is the month where that gap is widest, and most gardeners are spending it doing exactly the wrong things. Drop your growing zone or your US state in the comments right now. Daylily timing shifts by several weeks across this country, depending on where your first frost falls. That date changes everything I am about to tell you. Drop it in the comments. 1. Divide now, not in spring. This is what is actually happening inside a daylily when you divide it at the wrong time. A daylily divided in spring is interrupted at its most energy-intensive moment. The plant is simultaneously pushing new foliage, building root connections, and initiating the scape development that will produce flowers in summer. When you cut the root system and transplant it during that window, the plant makes a choice. It redirects every available resource into root regeneration and survival. Scape development stops. The plant looks fine all spring. It just never blooms. You did not kill it. You robbed it of a full flowering season without ever knowing it. Divide in late summer instead, and the biology works in your favor rather than against you. Root growth in daylilies remains active in late summer even as top growth slows down. A division made now has 6 to 8 weeks of active root regeneration ahead of it before dormancy sets in. By the time the ground freezes, that newly divided plant has already begun re-establishing. It enters spring with roots already in place rather than spending the entire early season catching up. The difference in bloom performance the following year between a late summer division and a spring division is not subtle. The rule is not a fixed date, it is a countdown from your first expected frost. Divide 6 to 8 weeks before that date. For zones 3 and 4 where frost arrives in early to mid-September, that window is now or already narrowing. Zone 5 with late September frost dates has early August as its primary window. Zone 6 with mid-October frosts gets the entire month of August, and this is genuinely the strongest division window in the country. Zones 7 through 9 have late August into mid-September, with the flexibility to wait for the worst of the summer heat to break before digging. Zone 10 is the single exception. Divide in early spring there to avoid establishing new roots into summer heat stress. The cost of ignoring this timing is real. Dividing during active bloom, at the peak of midsummer drought, or when the plant is in deep dormancy, does not just delay reblooming. It raises crown rot risk significantly, delays the next bloom cycle by 12 to 18 months, and reduces the survival rate of divisions. There is also a soil temperature signal worth knowing. Root regeneration peaks when soil sits between 50 and 65 degrees and top growth has dropped below 6 inches. That combination tells you more than the calendar alone. 2. Divide correctly, because technique matters as much as timing. Most people dig the clump first and then think about the foliage. Reverse that. Cut the foliage before you lift anything out of the ground. Trim it down to 6 to 8 inches above soil level. That foliage was going to die back after transplanting anyway. Removing it first redirects the plant's energy immediately into root establishment rather than trying to sustain leaves that are not going to survive the move. It reduces water loss through transpiration during the critical first weeks after replanting. and it encourages faster new leaf production from the crown once the division is in the ground. Once the foliage is cut, dig wide around the entire clump rather than trying to slide a spade directly underneath it. Lift the whole mass and then separate it using a sharp spade or a sturdy garden knife. Each division needs at minimum 2 to 3 fans of leaves attached to a section of crown with visible, healthy roots. Do not tear the clump apart with your hands. Tearing shreds the vascular tissue that connects crown to root and creates ragged wounds that invite crown rot at exactly the moment the plant has the least resistance to it. Space divisions 18 to 24 inches apart in the ground, up to 36 inches for the largest cultivars. A half teaspoon of bone meal worked into the planting hole gives the roots something to grow toward without overwhelming a plant that is already stressed from being moved. Water thoroughly at planting and keep the soil consistently moist for 4 to 6 weeks. Expect 3 to 5 weeks before meaningful new growth pushes through the crown. That gap is not failure. It is the plant doing the underground work that determines everything that happens next spring. 3. That yellowing foliage is not a disease. This is the most consistently misread thing that happens to daylilies in August, and it sends thousands of gardeners reaching for fungicide every single year on a plant that does not need any. In early August, after the primary bloom flush has finished, daylilies go through a process that Michigan State University Extension describes clearly in their research. The spring-produced leaves reach the end of their functional life, and the plant systematically retires them. This is scheduled foliage replacement. The plant is not sick. It is not drought-stressed. It is not being attacked by rust or leaf streak. It is running a biological process that happens on the same schedule every year regardless of what you do. After retiring the spring leaves, the plant pushes a second set of foliage that will carry it through fall and into dormancy. That second set is what stores the carbohydrate reserves that power next year's bloom. The yellowing you are seeing in August is a transition, not a crisis. The gardeners who panic and spray fungicide at this point are not helping their daylilies. They are spending money and adding chemical load to a plant that is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. What you should do instead is remove the yellowed material cleanly. Gently pull the retired leaves away from the crown or clip them back to 4 or 5 inches above ground level. This tidies the plant, removes material that can harbor fungal disease if left to decompose against the crown, and gives the new foliage room to emerge cleanly. For clumps that are severely yellow, more yellow than green by mid-August, cutting the entire plant back to just above ground level is appropriate and will not harm it. New growth comes back within 2 to 3 weeks, healthy enough to spend the rest of the season building the reserves that produce next year's flowers. If you are not subscribed to this channel yet, hit that button right now. Zone-specific perennial care every week, everything you need to know timed to when you actually need it. 4. Yellow comes out, green stays in. Daylily care advice splits badly on one specific question: how much foliage to remove after bloom? And the disagreement exists because both sides are talking about different things without realizing it. One camp says cut the tired plant to the ground in August and let it regenerate. The other says never remove post-bloom foliage because leaves photosynthesize through fall and build the energy reserves that drive next spring. Remove more than about 30% of healthy foliage and you are making a withdrawal from next year's flower budget. Both positions are correct. The distinction they are circling without landing on is the difference between yellow foliage and green foliage. Yellowed, senescent leaves have already stopped photosynthesizing. They are biologically retired. Removing them costs the plant nothing and eliminates material that will decompose against the crown and invite fungal disease. Green foliage is actively working, converting sunlight into the carbohydrates that will power root development through fall and initiate bud formation for the following season. Removing healthy green foliage is removing next year's flowers before they exist. The practical rule is straightforward. Remove everything yellowed or brown, cutting cleanly near the base of each leaf rather than pulling or tearing. Leave every green blade completely untouched. The single exception is a clump that has gone almost entirely yellow. When there is barely any green left, the plant has already completed most of its photosynthetic work for the season, and taking it to the ground to prevent disease spread is the right call. 5. This is the one plant you should actually fertilize in August. Everything else in the late summer garden gets the same advice. Ease off the nitrogen. Stop feeding. Let the plants begin hardening toward dormancy. Lavender, coneflower, hydrangea, roses. All of them benefit from reduced feeding as summer winds down. Daylilies break that rule, and Michigan State Extension research explains exactly why. The reason is that second flush of foliage. While every other perennial in your garden is winding down its growth, a daylily in August is simultaneously building a completely new set of leaves and loading its root system with the carbohydrate reserves that will power next spring's bloom. That is two major biological processes running at the same time, and both of them require energy. A light application of nitrogen-rich fertilizer in August gives the plant the raw material it needs to execute both without drawing down the root reserves it built through spring and early summer. The application does not need to be heavy. A standard flower fertilizer or a light application of lawn fertilizer with no weed control added, applied according to the label and watered in well, is sufficient. Size the application to the clump rather than applying a fixed amount regardless of plant size, and the cutoff matters as much as the feeding itself. Stop fertilizing approximately 8 weeks before your expected first frost date. Feeding too close to frost pushes soft new growth that hardens poorly and increases winter damage risk. That 8-week cutoff creates a zone split almost identical to the division timing. Zones 3 and 4 are already inside that window. Do not feed now. Zone 5 has early August only. Zone 6 can feed through early to mid-August. Zones 7 through 9 can feed comfortably through most of the month. Your frost date sets the schedule, not the calendar month. 6. Remove every spent scape and seed pod before they drain next year's bloom. Once a daylily finishes blooming, the plant's attention shifts automatically to seed production. Every seed pod that forms and develops is consuming resources, carbohydrates, minerals, water, that would otherwise go directly into root reserves and the foliage that builds next spring's flower budget. A single scape loaded with maturing seed pods can represent a significant energy diversion at exactly the time the plant most needs to be banking reserves for the following season. Leaving spent scapes in place is not a neutral act. It is an active redirection of next year's flowering energy into seeds you did not ask for and will not plant. Remove spent scapes as soon as they brown, cutting cleanly at the base where the scape emerges from the crown, not partway up the stem. Partial cuts leave a stub that continues to pull resources from the crown as it slowly dies back. This matters more for some cultivars than others. The University of Arkansas Extension specifically identifies Stella de Oro as a heavy seed setter that actively suppresses reblooming when scapes are left standing. If you grow Stella de Oro, scape removal is not a tidiness task. It is the primary difference between a second flush of bloom in September and no second flush at all. For cultivars capable of reblooming, Happy Returns, Stella de Oro, Early Bird Cardinal, the combination of scape removal, yellowed foliage cleanup, and a light August fertilizer application creates the conditions for a late-season repeat. Not guaranteed, dependent on your growing zone and the heat accumulation in your specific season. But the best available conditions: remove the old growth, water consistently, feed lightly, and let the plant decide what it has energy for. 7. Be honest with yourself about what your daylilies can actually do. This is where gardeners spend years blaming their own care for something that was decided at the genetics level before the plant was ever named. Rebloom is not a response to good gardening. It is a heritable trait. Modern reblooming varieties, Happy Returns, Stella de Oro among them, carry genetics that allow them to initiate multiple sequential bloom flushes from late spring through October in favorable conditions, extending their flowering season to 12 weeks or more. Traditional cultivars like Hyperion or Catherine Woodbury bloom intensely for 3 to 4 weeks, with peak flowering concentrated into a 10 to 14-day window. No amount of August care, no combination of feeding and cleanup and water management converts a single flush cultivar into a rebloomer. The genetics do not bend. Even genuine reblooming varieties are conditional. Happy Returns, one of the most reliable reblooming daylilies available, requires accumulation of more than 1,800 growing degree days after its first bloom flush before it will initiate a second. That is a climate threshold, not a gardening threshold. The same cultivar reblooms predictably in Zone 7 and almost never in Zone 4. Not because Zone 4 gardeners are doing anything wrong, but because their season does not accumulate enough heat units to trigger the second cycle before frost ends it. Understanding that distinction removes a significant amount of misplaced self-criticism from daylily gardening. One more piece of clarity worth having. Deadheading individual spent flowers does not create new buds. Bud count is set genetically and locked in during scape development. A scape carrying 9 buds will open 9 flowers regardless of how attentively you remove the spent ones. What deadheading and scape removal do is keep the plant clean, stop seed production from draining resources, and for true reblooming varieties, signal the plant to redirect energy toward the next flush rather than toward seed development. Those are real benefits. They just are not the same as creating flowers that would not otherwise exist. 8. The 5-second test that tells you which problem you are actually looking at. Daylily rust and daylily leaf streak are the 2 diseases most likely to appear in August, and they look similar enough that they get confused with each other constantly. And both get confused with the normal seasonal senescence described earlier in this video. Misidentifying the problem leads directly to the wrong response, which in the case of rust means applying a product that does nothing, and in the case of senescence means treating a plant that does not need treatment at all. The test takes 5 seconds and requires no tools. Run a finger along the underside of any leaf showing yellow or brown streaking. If you pick up orange powdery residue on your finger, that is rust. Orange pustules on the lower leaf surface are the definitive identifier. If there is no orange residue, you are looking at either leaf streak or the normal senescence process. Rust affects only the above-ground portions of the plant, leaves and scapes. It never penetrates the crown or the root system. This means cutting a badly affected clump to the ground is a genuinely effective response because it removes every structure the rust pathogen is living on while leaving the crown and roots completely unaffected. Leaf streak presents as a yellow discoloration that begins at the leaf tip and runs downward along the central midvein. It spreads through water splash, which is why overhead irrigation increases its rate of spread, and it can travel on hands and tools when foliage is wet. On the useful side, leaf streak development shuts down above 90 degrees. A hot August actually works in your favor by slowing its progression. Illinois Extension makes a point worth keeping. For leaf streak on an established daylily, doing nothing is a legitimate option. The plant is not dying. It looks rough by September. It comes back fully the following spring. Fungicide applications help but are not required for plant survival. Give yourself permission to simply monitor and clean up rather than treat. 9. One cleanup task that solves 3 problems simultaneously. The daylily leaf miner arrived in the United States from Asia around 2006 and has spread steadily across the eastern half of the country since. The adult is a small black fly that lays eggs on daylily foliage in spring. The larvae tunnel through the interior of the leaf, feeding as they go and leaving pale winding tracks, the mines that give the pest its name, that remain visible in the leaf tissue for the life of the blade. The pest overwinters as small tan pupae roughly the size of a grain of rice, tucked into the base of old leaves or at the soil line around the crown. Those pupae are what produce the following spring's adult population. Here is why this matters for what you are doing right now. The single most effective action available for managing leaf miner, leaf streak, and rust simultaneously is the same action: removing and disposing of affected and spent foliage rather than leaving it in place or composting it. Removing infested leaves eliminates the visible mines and reduces the leaf surface available for continued feeding. Removing all spent foliage at season end eliminates the overwintering sites where leaf miner pupae are sheltering. Removing yellowed and diseased material reduces the moisture-retaining decomposing matter that supports leaf streak and rust through winter. One cleanup routine: start now with the senescent August leaves, finish after the first frost takes the rest of the plant down, addresses all 3 at once. The critical detail is disposal. Bag the removed foliage and put it in the trash. Do not compost it. Compost piles do not reliably reach the temperatures required to kill daylily leaf miner pupae or the spores associated with leaf streak and rust. The August plan in order. Divide 6 to 8 weeks before your first expected frost. Cut foliage to 6 to 8 inches before you dig. Use a sharp tool to separate rather than tearing. Space divisions 18 to 24 inches apart, and water consistently for 4 to 6 weeks after planting. Recognize the early August yellowing as scheduled seasonal senescence, not rust, not leaf streak, not drought damage. Pull the yellow foliage cleanly from the crown. Leave every green blade in place. Cut an entirely yellow clump to the ground only when there is genuinely no green left worth protecting. Feed lightly this month with a nitrogen-containing fertilizer unless you are already within 8 weeks of your first frost. Your frost date sets the cutoff, not the calendar. Remove every spent scape at its base as soon as it browns. Do not leave seed pods to develop. If you grow Stella de Oro or other heavy seed setters, treat scape removal as the primary driver of rebloom rather than an optional cosmetic task. Run the finger test on any suspicious leaf lesion before reaching for any product. Orange residue means rust. No orange residue means leaf streak or senescence. Give yourself permission to leave leaf streak untreated on established plants. It looks rough, but it does not kill. Remove and trash all affected foliage rather than composting it. Start now with the senescent material and finish the job after your first frost. Do those things this August, and next summer you will be looking at a clump that is measurably larger, producing more scapes, and carrying more flowers than anything you have seen from that plant before. Not because daylilies are complicated, because you gave them one focused afternoon at the exact moment the biology was asking for it. Subscribe if you have not already and hit the notification bell so this content reaches you when it is actually relevant to your season. Zone-specific perennial care, timed to when you need it, every week. 2 things in the comments before you go. Tell me your state or your growing zone. And tell me whether your daylilies have started showing that August yellowing yet. Those 2 pieces of information together tell me exactly where you are in the seasonal cycle and what comes next for your specific plants. Drop both in the comments. I read every single one. Now go look up your first frost date if you do not already know it. That number is the foundation of everything I just told you.